Number 5. Time hipster? This one's an absolute classic in the time travelers caught on footage community, of which there are dozens of members. This strange photograph that's made the rounds of a man who looks like he's stepped out of time. The photo was taken in 1941 at the reopening of the South Fork Bridge in Canada, but when the photograph was included in a digital gallery in 2010, the internet instantly took to the guy in the crowd who looks like he just walked out of a crypto startup or had just come back from axe throwing and hitting the barcade. This guy is dressed in surprisingly hip clothes, looks like he's wearing contemporary shades, and kinda looks like he's holding a DSLR camera. You'd think a time traveler would be bringing back something a little bit more extravagant, but you know, maybe it was all they could afford. He could have spent all that money on those sweet shades and that cool shirt. Did he come back in time just to get some snaps of a bridge reopening? It seems like you could probably shoot your shot a lot higher if you were messing with the space-time continuum and all that. Nonetheless, the image of the well-dressed hipster in the crowd has sparked a lot of debate, since he definitely doesn't dress like he's from the 30s. Those shades are cooler than anything I've seen in that time period. Underneath what looks to be a contemporary hooded sweatshirt as well, he's wearing a Montreal Maroons jersey, a hockey team that played from 1924 to 1938. So either he's just very hip for the time, or he planned to disguise ahead of time to blend in with the locals. My theory? This guy knows all the best vintage stores are getting cleared out, and he's time traveling, going back to score vintage shirts from the appropriate time period. That Maroons jersey would definitely be a flex in 2022. Number 4. iPhone 1920. Now, if you're pretty active in that aforementioned time travelers caught on footage community, I'm sure you've seen this one as well, but I'm sure we've got some new viewers too, so let's take a look at it. An excerpt from the 1928 film The Circus, starring Charlie Chaplin, an old silent movie about a penniless clown joining the circus. Probably the biggest laugh riot of the late 20s. It would already be a notable piece of American film history, but among those who hunt the truth, it might contain proof of a time traveler. A woman can be seen walking through in the background, wearing unnotable attire for the time period, but holding something up to her ear, which she appears to be talking into? What? As she walks by, it looks eerily like she's talking into a mobile phone of some sort. One has to wonder if she's getting good reception. I doubt Verizon had as many satellites in the 20s. Still, it's hard to deny that it definitely looks like she's talking into a cell phone. Now, some skeptics have offered some possibilities for what it could be, as skeptics are wont to do, with the most popular theory being that it's just a hearing aid of some kind, and the poor woman is just trying to hear better. Another slightly more cute suggestion is that the woman is just a bit camera shy, and is trying to cover her face as she walks by. Or, also a possibility, she could just be an old woman talking to herself and she's having a moment. I've got to say, if she is a time traveler though, she is doing a very sloppy job letting herself get recorded and analyzed like this. Or maybe that's exactly what she wanted. We may never know, but since she's such a popular time traveler, you'd think by now someone would have tried to travel back in time to this incident just to get the facts and finally put a close to the case, right? If no one else will, I will. Number 3. Time traveling car. This next video, footage from a dash cam in Russia from a patrol vehicle uploaded to YouTube, has garnered millions of views and lots of puzzled viewers. Take a look. We can see a fairly ordinary scene, a blocked up intersection and jam-packed rush hour traffic. As the car in front of our car starts to drive forward, it turns to the left and we see another car appear out of completely nowhere, like it just materialized out of the ether. Now, the most logical, sound, and scientific explanation is obviously that this car is a ghost, but let's try and take this seriously for a bit here and use our brains and think rationally. It is possible that this is a Back to the Future situation, and this car is traveling through time and just happens to be materialized careening through this intersection. I mean, when you watch this clip, it really does seem like this car comes out of nowhere. You don't see it at all until you do. Now, unfortunately, a strong bit of evidence against the time travel theory is that we don't see any blazing tire treads on the road, which is a universally recognized sign of proof that a time traveling car has been through here. Still, until we get a scientist of some kind to take a look at this clip and explain to me indisputably what is happening, I am resigned to say that this is absolutely time travel. Number 2. Pandora's MacBook. Take a look at this ancient Greek statue. It depicts a young girl offering something of note to what looks to be a noblewoman accepting the gift. Taking a look at the gift though, it looks suspiciously like it's a little girl trying to show an older woman something on her laptop. I mean, look at it. It's even got charging ports in the side. And it doesn't look like there's a USB slot though, so we have to assume it is history's first MacBook. Typical. Now, skeptics argue that it could be a depiction of a very hollow chest or a thin chest, but if this little girl is supposed to be offering the noblewoman a gift, I would say what good gift is going to come in a package that small. At best, it's a gift card, which is absolutely terrible, says you weren't thinking about it at all. It seems a lot more likely to me that someone traveled back to ancient Greece and maybe left their laptop somewhere or offered it to the people as a gift of technological prowess from the future. Imagine traveling to an ancient civilization and showing them a MacBook. You would be heralded as their god. And if you showed them Fortnite, oh, they would be writing myths about you for eons. What if over the years, all the things that have been described as being godly, mythical powers were really just time-traveling pranksters going back to mess with the time stream a little bit? I'm very, very confident that if humanity ever does attain the ability to travel through time, teenagers will mostly use it to pull pranks and create irreversible damage to the timeline. In fact, I am almost certain that has already happened, given how odd the last couple years have been for us. Number 1. Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves may very well be the greatest actor of all time. A big statement, I know, but it is a hill I will protect with my life. Name a bad Keanu Reeves performance. You can't. From Neo to John Wick to Johnny Silverhand, all the way to Theodore Logan III, Keanu Reeves always delivers. And it makes sense, because he's been acting for a very long time. Maybe a very, very, very long time. There are an alarming amount of paintings and photos throughout history of people who appear to be the stunning image of Keanu Reeves. Now, the most likely answer, of course, is that Keanu Reeves has been traveling through time several times to research and prepare for whatever role he needs. Here he is as King Charlemagne, who was buried hurriedly in cold weather, perhaps as a way to cover up that the actor had to leave the role and there was nothing to bury. Here he is as Paul Mounet, a French actor who appeared in multiple silent films, who would later go on to be a professor. When Mounet passed, his body was never found, probably because he had to travel back to our timeline to be on The Tonight Show. Worth noting is that when directly confronted about his possible immortality or latent time-traveling ability by Jimmy Fallon, Keanu did not outright deny it, instead only offering the quote, "We're all stardust, baby," which is absolutely something a man who has seen the depths of the cosmos would say. In a 2014 interview, when questioned about giving away the sum of his Matrix earnings to the stunt crew, he responded, "Money is the last thing I think about. I could live on what I have already made for the next few centuries." And maybe he already has. Number 5. Victor Goddard. Royal Air Force Commander Victor Goddard was a flying ace who served with the RAF in the First and Second World Wars, who seemed to be a vessel for paranormal activity. In 1935, during action in the Second World War, Sir Goddard was sent to investigate the condition of an abandoned Scottish airfield in the unnotable village of Drem, east of Edinburgh. When Goddard flew over the field, he reported it as they'd expected, that it was as they described, a desolate, abandoned airfield where the cows were grazing on grass that had forced itself through. As he circled the airfield, however, he found himself caught in a storm cloud that had been passing overhead and had to fight to regain control. When exiting the cloud, Goddard found himself frozen in fear, looking down and reporting that the airfield had been completely repaired. The airbase had been restored, now fueling and stocking 4 biplanes in its hangar. The abandoned field was now crewed by a staff of mechanics, all dressed in blue coveralls, unlike the RAF at the time, which would have worn brown uniforms. The planes on the field too had been painted a bright yellow, contrasting with the usual drab silver of the RAF at the time. The storm cloud passed through again, and Goddard reported it vanished yet again. Had he passed through a temporal loop? Was there something more in that storm? Most concerningly and most interestingly, in 1939 the airfield at Drem was restored completely to working order, and shockingly, the RAF mechanic uniforms were updated to be blue coveralls and the planes started to be painted yellow, as if for a moment Goddard had seen years into the future. The incident haunted Goddard, and he wrote about his experiences in his book Flight Towards Reality, where he tried to make some sense of his brief flight through time. Number 4. Mike Markim. In 1995, Mike Markim was a 21-year-old student majoring in electricity with a knack for homemade gadgets. His goal? To create a time machine out of scraps in his home in Missouri. The device, which he had dubbed Jacob's Ladder, referring to the biblical ladder to the heaven, and less likely the fantastic 90s horror film, was constructed using the laser from a compact disc player and a continuous arc between 2 poles. And you know what, if I'm being honest, I'm more of a Morty than I am a Rick. I got no idea how he built this and I got no idea what it does, but he says it would help him travel through time. Markim claimed that his device produced such energy that when he threw a piece of sheet metal into it, it disappeared and reappeared seconds later. Hoping to see what he could do with some real power, Markim stole 6 transformers from a power grid nearby. His next experiment caused a blackout in the neighborhood, and his theft alerted the local police. Markim spent the next few months in jail, but upon his release was stunned to discover that he'd become a bit of a local hero. After an interview on a radio station, calls were pouring in from people who wanted to donate money, supplies, and their own ideas on how to help Markim with his time travel device. For the next 2 years, Markim would work tirelessly on his machine, having rebuilt the plans to be the size of a man. 1997 would be the last update from Mike Markim, who vanished from the public eye and the world at large, with his whereabouts being unknown since then. After missing a call from his parole officer, police tried to track Markim down, going to the warehouse he used as a workshop, finding nothing but burned up machines, damaged electronics, and no sign of life at all. Did Markim's machine work? Well, we may never know unless he decides to come back. Or forward. Number 3. Anne Moberly and Elle Jourdain. In 1901, two friends and collegiates, Anne Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, were both teachers at St. Hugh's College in Oxford who were traveling through France on a vacation. Their primary destination was the Palace of Versailles, the former center of political power in France until the Revolution. What was supposed to be a walk through the annals of history became far more literal than either of the women would expect. Taking a promenade through the Petit Trianon, the two claimed to have found themselves walking through the 17th century, surrounded by people in period attire, going about their day as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Jourdain claimed that it was as if they'd seemed they were walking through a painting, that it felt as if they were in a living tableau. As they walked through, confused and disoriented, they came forward to a woman sketching in the park who they assumed to be another tourist, who they later claimed was Marie Antoinette, the last queen of France. Shortly after, the pair found themselves back in the palace as if nothing had happened. They had returned and visited Petit Trianon several times, hoping to reignite whatever had occurred. When they returned to Oxford, they produced two separate personal accounts of what had occurred, desperate for answers. In 1911, the two produced a book called An Adventure, under pen names for fear their academic status would be threatened. The two never found answers for what happened to them and were often ridiculed for their belief, their claims being dismissed as a shared delusion, a folie à deux, or nothing more than a tall tale for attention, which seems unlikely from two esteemed teachers. So what really happened then? Did Anne Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain share a hallucination on a trip together? Or did they accidentally walk through time and find themselves in another world, if even for a moment? Number 2. Breaking a story 10 years before it happens. In 1932, a pair of newspaper reporters, J. Bernard Hutton and photojournalist Joachim Brandt, had been assigned to cover a story on the shipyard in Hamburg, Germany. Not the most exciting gig, but hey, sometimes that's being a newspaper reporter. The men drove out to the yard, questioned the workers, spoke to the executives, and had finished everything they were sent out to do by about the middle of the afternoon. Presumably bored out of their minds having to document all the excitement of a 1930s shipyard, the men were rattled to hear the screech of aircraft flying up ahead, and found themselves surrounded by warplanes circling around. The workers were fleeing, and the two journalists tried to flee the scene as quickly as possible, making sure to take several photos to take back to the newspaper as proof of an attack, finding it a much more compelling story than what they'd originally been asked to cover. The security personnel insisted the men had to evacuate as soon as possible. The men fled, saving themselves by a hair. But as they escaped the facility, they found something far more disconcerting. The skies of Hamburg were clear. There was no black smoke, no damage, no warplanes, no panic. The men didn't understand. It was as if the battle lasted for seconds. When Brandt developed his photographs, shockingly, it depicted the shipyard as they'd seen it that morning, completely intact. The editor dismissed all of their claims as a farce, assuming his reporters had just stopped to try some local drinks and came up with a wild story. The two never spoke of the incident again, until in 1943, a story came out about a Royal Air Force raid on a Hamburg shipyard. It was exactly as the men had described to the detail, 11 years after they had seen it. Number 1. The Philadelphia Experiment. If there is any one body on the planet that I am easily convinced has a leg up on time travel, it is the US government. In 1943, the US Navy were attempting to experiment with cloaking technology to be able to render something invisible, with their ultimate goal being a full warship. The USS Eldridge was the subject of these experiments. The experiment was to create a high voltage magnetic field around the ship in order to cloak it or something. Again, I'm a host for a YouTube channel. I am the farthest thing from a scientist. The story goes here that the ship vanished, surrounded by a cloud of green smoke. The crew of the Eldridge complained of severe nausea, several of them complaining of mental breakdowns, extreme mood swings, and disorders after the experiment. Some claim to have even been rematerialized, fused into the bulkheads. Of course, everything about the Philadelphia Experiment is as classified can get, documents full of blacked out redacted chunks, so we only have the reports of individual crew members to go off of. One service member from the ship, Al Bielek, claims that the invisibility cloak was all a front, and the true experiment was to travel through time, claiming that for moments the ship had traveled 100 years into the future, but what felt like for only 10 seconds. Now, some of Bialik's claims get a bit out there, difficult to follow, but bear with us because they're interesting to listen to. Bialik claimed that the world of the future was a unified utopia of floating cities and clouds, in a world without governments, being ran by a hyper-intelligent AI called the Synthetic Intelligence Computer System. War and all its conflicts had become a thing of the past. Bialik went on to claim that he was involved in the Montauk project as well, a conspiracy theory that alleges, as part of the MK Ultra experiments, the US Army was attempting to research psychological warfare and time travel. Now, obviously, the US government did not acknowledge or give the time of day to any of Bialik's claims, but I mean, why would they? They're not gonna come out and say, yeah, you got us. Hands up, we've been experimenting with time travel and this guy is blowing the entire thing for us. Or would they just stand by, say nothing, smile, and just insist that we're all just tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorists?
Jumping into number 5, we have Project Montauk. It is a fact that until 1981 there was a US Air Force base in Montauk, New York, at the eastern tip of Long Island. But this site has been famously steeped with some pretty bold claims. It was the site of a series of top secret government time travel experiments. Allegedly. In the 1980s, writer Preston Nichols claims that he recovered repressed memories of working on one of these projects. Now this is where it all turned a little bit Stranger Things. Get the egos at the ready. I'm ready. He claimed that the project focused on child experiments, with one child even gaining psychic abilities. Another claim, well, they created a time portal to 1943. Not just any moment in 1943 though. This time portal opened up into the USS Eldridge, the subject of another notorious government project, the Philadelphia experiment. Essentially, the experiment focused on turning naval ships invisible, but it ended up with some timey-wimey stuff and drove the whole crew insane. Good. Great.
Coming in at number 4, we have Jofar Vorin. Sounds like a side character from Tatooine, right? Well, you wouldn't be too far off. In 1850, a man named Jofar Vorin was found in Frankfurt on Oder, Germany, washed up seemingly from nowhere. Jofar spoke very broken German, which already made his outlandish claims even more difficult to understand. This guy claimed he was from Laxaria and spoke the ancient languages of Laxarian and Abrahamian. What are they? Well, nothing to you and I, but to Jofar, Laxarian was a written language of the clerical order of Laxaria, which he claimed was a Christian religion known as Ispatian, practiced in the mysterious land of Laxaria, situated hundreds of miles away from Europe. Jofar said he was searching for his long lost brother, but was shipwrecked along the way. Unlucky for him. This guy didn't recognize any maps at the time and claimed that the world that he knew it had 5 sections: Sakria, Alsfar, Aslar, Auslar, and Joplar. Sound crazy? Well, probably, but the German authorities didn't think so. He was taken to Berlin to be questioned and studied, and well, no one has heard from him since.
Wow, wow, wow. I liked that. That's very X-Files. Is that X-Files that I just did?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Was it?
I think so.
No?
Well, I liked it anyway. Good on him. Coming in now at number 3, we have the Palace of Versailles. Back in 1901, 2 professors from St Hugh's College in Oxford, England, travelled to the world famous Palace of Versailles. Now to me, this kind of sounds like part of the plot of Outlander Season 2. Where's Jamie? If you didn't know, the Palace of Versailles was the royal home of the French monarchy until their untimely demise in 1792. Let them eat cake and all of that. Well, Marie Antoinette, one of the last royals to live there, was abruptly executed in 1793. So it was incredibly bizarre then when in 1901 our 2 professors, Anne Mobley and Eleanor Jourdain, were having a stroll through the grounds of the palace, enjoying the sights, the sounds, and just so happened to stumble upon Marie Antoinette in the very flesh, just chilling outside her private retreat. There she was in all of her regal glory, head still on, sitting on a stool and sketching a painting. She shortly disappeared after a group of tourists approached the area, but But the two professors were so astonished that they wrote a book on the matter. Now it gained notoriety by how grounded it seemed, considering the two professors were highly educated and well-respected women. Maybe they slipped through a time stream. Who knows? There may also be another explanation. On Most Amazing Top 10, I did the Parisian urban legends, and in it, the Palace of Versailles came up. Guess who's said to haunt it? Yup, that's right, Mrs. Let Them Eat Cake herself. What do you think, Jack? Time traveler or ghost?
Time traveler.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I think that's cool, like Marie Antoinette could just pop up in any
She'd have been
time.
headless Alice.
Yeah, that's true, very true.
If we apply, ghost
logic.
Ghost logic. Swinging right in at number 2, we have The Man from Taured. This story is pretty damn crazy, so bear with me as I collect myself. In 1954, a man was trying to get through customs at Haneda Airport in Tokyo when he stumbled upon a bit of a trouble with customs. It wasn't the usual incident. He hadn't accidentally packed a steak knife into his carry-on or failed to declare the bag of potatoes in his suitcase. It was because he claimed to be from a country that, well, it just didn't exist. Strangely enough though, he even had a passport with stamps in it to prove that he actually did. This passport was from a country called Taured, and it completely perplexed the Japanese custom agents. He claimed that it was between Spain and France, and when officials pulled out a map and pointed to Andorra, the man became very angry. Yes, he said that location was correct, but he was from Taured, a country which had existed for at least 1,000 years. He'd never even heard of Andorra. The man was given a hotel room for the evening, probably while customs figured out what the hell was going on, but even though there were armed guards stationed outside his room, the man just up and vanished the very next morning. His passport, which was stored in a secure security office, was also gone. The mystery remains completely unsolved to this very day.
Jack saved the #1 spot for me. What could it be? We have the mystery of John Titor. In November of the far gone year of 2000, the time travel section of the internet became a hive of activity after a series of posts from a man named John Titor. Although they'd been posted to the usual conspiracy theorist hotspots, his claim managed to pick up traction because of his intriguing content. John Titor claimed to be a soldier based in Tampa, Florida from the year 2036. By his own account, the government had sent him back in time to 1975 to retrieve a particular IBM computer which they needed in order to debug some pesky computer programs. Yada yada yada. Sounds asinine enough, right? Well, John Titor claimed that he'd hopped off his time machine in the year 2000 for personal reasons, and since he was already there, he might as well warn everyone how crappy the future was gonna get. Thanks, John. John claimed that civil unrest would begin in the US in 2004, and by 2008 there would be a full-blown civil war. 2015 would see the US splitting into 5 different regions, and World War III would have come and gone by now. Well, as we know, none of these things have happened, so complete madman, or was his timing just off? People are still so convinced by John Titor's account and its incredible level of believability. He spoke in thorough detail about the mechanics and science of his time traveling machine, and it almost seemed impossible that he isn't, maybe somewhere is telling the truth. All of his posts have been deleted, and most records of him have been expunged from the internet. Fishy. Fishy.